Yes, I am. Welcome back. Welcome back. You know what's up. You know what I do. We're reading the Metaphysics. We're at part 8. Very exciting. Um, I actually don't think there's a lot left of book Delta. There is mutilated kind. Okay, might be more than I thought. Okay, we have to get to 150. And how long have we got? Um, Quantity, potential. Here we are. Oh, 20 pages, boy. 20 pages. That's easy. It's easy work. Alright, let's get to it. Potentiality, the principle of process and change, either in another thing or in the same thing qua other. The art, for instance, of building is not present in what is built, whereas the art of medicine, it may, since it is a potentiality, be present in the person being healed, but not qua the person being healed. So what is a principle of change or process in this way is said to be a potentiality, whether in something else or in the thing itself qua something else. Also, a principle of change or process through the agency of something else or of the thing qua something else. Also, a principle of change or process through the agency of something else, or the thing itself qua something else. After all, it is by dint of the principle by which something affected is affected in some way that we say that the thing affected has potentiality for being affected, and this sometimes merely if it is affected at all, sometimes not with regard to it not sorry, merely if it is affected at all, sometimes not with regard to its each and every affection, but only if it is affected for the better. I think all this is saying, this definition is saying, is the same as the first definition. It's a principle of the process of change, but it's saying that you can have this via something else. So, it could be, for example, building as the potential for something, and then the thing being built had that potential. Or it could be like the potential could be like a secondary thing. Water giving the potentiality for a seed to potentially become a tree. I think that's what it's saying. The potentiality for performing the given function well or in an intentionally guided manner. For instance, on occasion one says of those who can just about walk or talk but not do so well that they do not have the potentiality to walk or talk. Okay. Ditto for affection. That's a very short one. Those states in virtue of which things are immune to affection simpliciter, or incapable of change, or not easily to be changed for the worse. For things are broken, compressed, bent, and, in a word, destroyed, not by dint of having a potentiality, but by dint of not having one, and by missing out on something. And of such things those are immune to affection which are affected but slightly, if at all, though through a potentiality, and by dint of their having the potentiality and being in a certain condition. Given that there is this plurality of accounts of potentiality, in one way the account of the potential will correspondingly be of something that has a principle of process and change, given that what can induce stasis is also a sort of potential. In something else or in the same thing qua something else. Another account has it that a thing is potential if something else has a potentiality of this stripe over it. I'm assuming that says stripe. And another is that it is potential if it has the potentiality to change into something of whatever sort, whether for worse or for better. Indeed, even what is destroyed is held to be potentially destructible, since it would not have been destroyed if it had no potential for it. In fact, however, what is destroyed has a certain disposition, a cause and principle of an affection of this sort. This being held sometimes because it is thought to have some state, and sometimes because it is thought to have been deprived of it. If, then, a privation is in a way a state, then everything would be deemed to be potential by dint of having a certain state, and if not, then by homonymy. 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 I cannot say that word. With the result that things are potential both by dint of having a certain state and a principle, and by having the privation of this, assuming one can be said to have a privation. Yet another account is that something is potential by dint of the fact that neither any other thing nor itself qua other thing has a potentiality to destroy it. I don't get this last definition of potential, to be honest. Yet another account is that something is potential by dint of the fact that any other thing nor itself qua another thing has the potentiality to destroy it. Let's think about this. I guess the way you would maybe word that is if it's if it's impossible for a thing to not be possible, then that thing in question is a potential. That's probably how I would word that, which in my mind is easier to understand. So like, if there's no real way of making it impossible for you to be able to die, then you have the potential to die. Does that make sense? That's what I think this definition is saying, but it's saying it in a very weird way. Now, also, all these cases are examples of potentiality either by dint of the fact that the event in question might or might not turn out to happen, or by dint of the fact that it might do so either well or badly. So this is just saying potentiality is also probability. Even inanimates, in fact, there is present a potentiality of this sort. Think of the case of musical instruments. One says that one lyre gives voice and another does not, just if it does not do so in a euphonious way. I do not know what that word means. Pleasing to the ear. I didn't know we had a word for that. Well, that's cool. That's a good word. and non-potentiality is a privation of potentiality, and of the principle of the sort that has been stated. And this can either be general, or when something is naturally constituted to have the potentiality, or indeed when it should, by its constitution, already have the potentiality. There are, I take it, differences between the account of non-potentiality for fathering of a boy, a man, and a eunuch. Arranged against each of the two sorts of potentiality, there is a corresponding non-potentiality, both that is, to the mere source of process and to the source of good process. This one way in which things are said to be non-potential, but there is another way in which things are said to be both potential and non-potential. Thus the non-potential is that whose contrary is true of necessity. For instance, it is non-potential for the diagonal to be commensurate, because to say that it is a falsehood, of which not only is the contrary true, but it is necessary that the diagonal be incommensurate. So it is not just false, but necessarily false to say that it is commensurate. Yeah, so this is another thing where it's saying potentiality is possibility. And the contrary of this, the potential occurs when it is not necessary to say that its contrary be false. For example, it is potential that a man should be seated, since it is not false of necessity that he is not seated. So in one way, as we have said, potential indicates what is not necessarily false, and in another way, what is true, and in another still, what admits of being true. And the potentiality in geometry is spoken of metaphorically. Now things that are potential in this way are not so by dint of a potentiality. Those potential things, however, whose account is based on a potentiality, have in all cases accounts that relate to the single primary potentiality, viz. A principle of change in something else, or in the same thing qua something else. Other things then are said to be potential by dint, in some cases, of having something else with this sort of potentiality over them. In other cases by dint of not having such, and in other cases by dint of having it one way rather than another, and the same goes for non-potential things. So the basic definition of the primary potentiality would be a principle of change in something else or in the same thing qua something else. Quantity. What is divisible into intrinsic parts, each of which has by constitution a sort of unity and thisness. A plurality is denumerable. What is divisible into intrinsic parts, each of which has by constitution a sort of unity and thisness. Okay, that makes sense. A plurality is a denumerable quantity. A magnitude is a measurable quantity. What is said to be a plurality is what is potentially divisible into things that are not continuous, whereas what is said to be a magnitude is what is potentially divisible into things that are continuous. And and the sort of magnitude which has continuity in one direction is length, in two directions breadth, in three directions depth, and a delimited plurality is number. A delimited plurality is line. A delimited breadth is surface, and a delimited depth is body. And some things are said to be quantities per se, and some to be quantities accidentally. For instance, the line is a per se quantity, whereas musicality is a quantity accidentally. And some of the things that are per se quantities are quantities by substance. The line is a quantity in this way. Given that a sort of quantity is involved in the account stating it's what it was to be that thing. Others are affections and states of a substance of this sort, such as much and little, long, short, broad and narrow, deep and shallow, great and small too, and greater and smaller, under both an intrinsic and mutual account, are per se affections of quantity. And these words are also applied by metaphor to other cases. As for things that are said to be quantities accidentally, the account of some of them is like that in which it has been said that musicality and whiteness are quantities, in that there is some quantity to which they pertain, and the accounts of others is like that in which process and time are said to be quantities, which are also said to be sorts of quantities, and continuous by dint of the fact that the things of which they are affections are indivisible. And in this I am speaking not of what undergoes the process, but of that interval which the process occurs, since it is because this is a quantity that the process too is a quantity. And this is because the process is a quantity that the time is a quantity. Quality, the differentia of the substance. For example, man is an animal of a certain quality in that he is bipedal, and a horse is an animal of a certain quality in that it is quadrupedal, and a circle is a figure of a certain quality in that it has no angles. This is because the substantial differentia is a quality. Also, as in the case of things immune to process, and the mathematicals, numbers for instance, have certain qualities, such as composite multidirectional numbers, of which the plane and the solid are imitations, numbers, that is, with 2 or 3 factorials more generally. Whatever over and above quantity pertains to the substance of the number. And of course the substance of a number is that number times 1. The substance of, say, 6 being not 2 times 6 or 3 times 6, but 1 times 6. 6 is 1 times 6. That is the strangest definition for a number I have ever seen. All things that are affections of substances undergoing process. Examples: heat and cold, whiteness and blackness, heaviness and lightness, etc. It is in terms of these that bodies, when they undergo a change, are said to be altered. Regarding virtue and vice, and evil and good more generally, there seem to be more or less 2 styles of account of quality, and one of these is the more fundamental. Primary quality is the differentia of the substance. In fact, quality, even in the case of numbers, is a part of this. It is too a differentia of substances. although either of substances that are immune to process or of substances qua immune to process. And other qualities are modifications of things subject to process qua subject to process, and the differentiations of processes. And virtue and vice are part of these affections, indicating as they do the differentiations of the process and of the actualization by dint of which the things undergoing process either act or are acted in a good or ill way. For something that has the potentiality to undergo the process or be actualized in a certain way is good, or something that has the potentiality to do so in the contrary way is wicked. And it is especially in animate things that good and evil indicate a quality, above all in the case of those processed of rational choice. Relation 15. As the double stands to the half, the threefold to the third, more generally, in the way that anything that is many times something stands to that thing divided many times, and in which what has excess stands to what over which it has an excess. I don't really know what this is saying. This is just word soup. I get what it's like trying to say, as double stands to the half and three-fourths. Like, I get what it's getting at, but it's just a bad definition. But I can't come up with a better definition, so like, who am I to judge, I guess? As what heats stands to what is heated, and what cuts to what is cut, and more generally, what produces to what is acted on. Um, hmm. What is measurable stands to the measure, what is knowable stands to the knowledge, and what is perceptible stands to the perception. Hmm. I'm going to try and come up with my own definition for relation, which sort of gets at what it's trying to get at in a better way. I think the better word for relation might be something that um, when something is secondarily similar to something else. So, or accidentally similar to something else is what I would say relation is. Maybe that's probably the better way to think of it. Because, for example, with heat, it says what heat stands to what is heated. So the substance of, let's say, a fire, um, let's say for sake of argument, I don't think this is true, but let's say heat is the substance of fire, right? And what is heated has the accidental quality of being hot in that moment. So the relation is the fact that the essence, while they're not essentially the same thing, they share a similar they share a similarity on a secondary level, right? Because one or so attributes can be secondarily the same thing. So, for example, you and your brother, you might be, you are related, and you are related because you share something that is similar, which is the same parent, right? So it's but I am not the same as my brother, right? But because we share a secondary attribute that is not related exactly to our essence, or substance, but is still an attribute. It's the sharing of a secondary attribute is what a relation is. That's what I'm going to go for. Alright, let's read. Now, examples of one are in a numerical relation, either simpliciter or in some defined way, to numbers themselves or the number 1. Example, double is a defined number relative to the number 1, whereas the multiple is indeed numerically related to the number 1, but not in a defined way, not, that is, in such and such or such and such way. Then again, what is 1 and a half times a big as something to that thing is in a defined numerical relation to a number. And what is 1.x times something else is in an undefined numerical relation to that thing, just as the multiple is towards the number 1. As for the relation of what has an excess to that over which it has an excess, this is not numerically defined at all. After all, number is commensurate, and number is not said of what is not commensurate, whereas what has an excess is relative to that over which it has an excess, something and something else. The something else not being defined and being equally able to be equal or not to be equal to that over which there is an excess. Again, this whole excess, same up here. Oops, I don't get it. I'm just gonna pretend I didn't read that. So the accounts of all the relations at which we have so far looked are numerical, and such relations are affections of number. And so too, for that matter, are the equal, the similar, the same in another way. Their accounts are, after all, based on the number 1. Things are the same, for instance, if their substance is 1, similar if their quality is 1, and equal if their quantity is 1. And the number 1 is the principle and measure of the number. And so all the accounts that we have studied of relations are based on number, though not in the same way. Things of group 2, which are active and undergo affection, and do so by dint of an active and effective potentiality, and of the actualizations of these potentialities. Thus, what has the potentiality to affect heating in a relation to what has the potentiality of being heated, inasmuch as it has the potentiality to heat it, whereas what is actually heating stands in a relation to what is actually being heated, and what is actually cutting stands in a relation to what is being cut, inasmuch as it is actually heating/cutting it. There are, on the other hand, no actualizations of numerical relations, except in the way that has been indicated. There are no actualizations for them in terms of process. And some potentiality relations have accounts based on references to tenses. For instance, what has made something stands in a relation to what has been made by it, and what will make something stands in a relation to what will be made by it. In fact, it is in just this way that a father is said to be a father of his son, inasmuch as the father is what has made something and the son is what has been made in a particular way. And there are some, yeah, I didn't think of it, relation in terms of like process. If you are the cause, if you are part of the process, then you can be relation, you can have a relation by that process. I guess that's still a secondary similarity though. By sharing a secondary attribute or secondary quality, by sharing a secondary quality. Something like that. Accounts based on privation of a potentiality such as the non-potential in things with similar accounts such as the invisible. All things then with relational accounts, whether numerical or potential, are relations by dint of the fact that the account of something else is involved in what they are, not that what they are is involved in the account of something else. So a relational account of group and things of group 3, which are what can be measured, what can be known, and what can be thought, are said to be relations by dint of the fact that the account of something else is related to them. For that thing is something that can be thought indicates that there can be thinking of it, but the thinking is not relational to that which it thinks. To say what to say that it was would involve saying the same thing twice. And in the same way, sight is the sight of something, not the sight of what is the sight of, for all that may be patently true. It is relational, the colour or some other such item. On the other way of putting it, the same thing will have been said twice, to wit what sight is, that of which it is sight. And things with a per se relational account are in some cases said to be, in this way, rational, and in other cases, if their genera are of this sort, medicine for instance, is a relational thing because its genus knowledgeable is thought to be relational, and there are also certain features by dint of having which a thing is said to be relational, such as equality, because the equal is, and similarity, because the similar is. And other things are occasionally relational. Examples: man may be relational in that it is an accidental feature of him that he is double something, and double is a relation. Or whiteness may be relational if the same thing has the accidental features of being double and being white. Why did they not have spacebars? That's my question. Complete, like literally. If I do this, no spacebar, no spacebar, no spacebar, no spacebar, no spacebar. They're really cramming that in there, huh? Something outside which complete. We're on to complete now. I am a complete nut job. Something outside which it is not possible to come across even a single one of its parts. For example, the complete period of an event is the period such that it is not possible outside it to come across some part of it. Okay. So basically, when it is impossible for there to be something is complete, or it is impossible to come across a part of it and that part be the thing in question. So as an example, if you come across a chassis, right, that's not a car, it's just a chassis. But if you have a car with a chassis, then that thing is complete, I guess. Something which, in point of excellence and rightness, cannot be excelled in its kind. A doctor and a flute player are complete when they are in no way deficient in point of the form or of their proprietary excellence. And in fact, we transfer the word to bad things to say that someone is a complete sycophant, or a complete thief. Not surprisingly, given that we go so far to say that such people are good. Speaking of a good thief and a good sycophant, the excellence of a sort of completion, after all, a particular is complete and every substance is complete, just in case and point of the form of its proprietary excellence. It is not deficient in any part of its natural magnitude. Also, if a thing's end is a feature of it, and if that end is serious, that thing is said to be complete. For it is by dint of processing their ends that things are complete. And so, because the end is an extreme, we transfer the word to base things as well and say that something has been completely ruined or completely destroyed, when there is no deficiency in the destruction and harm, which rather is at the extreme. And this is why death is also metaphorically said to be an end, since it, like an end, is an extreme. But, of course, what something is ultimately for is also an end. This then is a range of ways in which things can have per se account in sorry, in terms of completion. Some because in point of rightness they are not deficient in any way, and do not admit of being exceeded or of having any part of themselves outside themselves. Some, more generally, by not admitting of being exceeded in the genus in question, and by not having any part of themselves outside themselves. And other cases are based on the two and above are complete by either making or having a thing of that sort. You could then say something is complete when you cannot that's basically the second definition. When you cannot contribute to it more in order for its end or essence to be actuated more perfectly, or by being adapted, such a thing, or by having a count that is in some way related to those things that are primarily said to be complete. Limite. 17 words. It is kind of crazy to think about how big the definitions are for single words. Limit. The extreme point of a particular. The first point outside which no part of the thing can be found, and inside which all the parts of the thing can be found. Whatever is the form of a magnitude or of something that has magnitude. The end of the particular. And this sort of thing is what the process and action of the particular is to, not what they are from. In fact, sometimes it is both that from which and that to which the final cause, substance, and what it was to be that thing of the particular, inasmuch as this is the cognitive limit of the particular, and if it is a cognitive limit, it must also be a limit of the object. This shows that there are many accounts of limit as there are of principle, or indeed more. Since the principle is a sort of limit, whereas not every limit is a principle. Respect. A range of accounts. 1. The form and substance of the particular thing. Example, that in respect of which the good man is good, and the good itself, the form and substance of a particular thing. The primary subject in which it is natural for something to be produced, in the way that it is natural for color to be produced in a surface. Thus, in the primary account the respect is the form, but in a secondary account it is in a way the matter and primary subject of the particular. More generally, there are as many accounts of the respect as there are of the cause. It is equally easy to ask, so that in respect of which someone came and for which someone came, or to ask in respect of what someone has calculated or miscalculated and by what he has miscalculated. Respect in terms of position, in respect of which someone is standing or walking. All such situations indicate position and location. In light of this, it is necessary that the per se, in respect of itself, also have a plurality of accounts, as followed. The what it was to be that thing of the particular. For example, Callias is per se Callias, and what it was to be Callias. Whatever pertains to a thing's what is it, so that, for example, Callias is per se an animal, given that animal is included in the account of Callias, and that Callias is a sort of animal. So now we're talking about per se, what per se is in the definition of respect. Okay. A pertains per se to B, and if B has received A into its primary self or into some part of itself. Examples, the surface is white per se, and a man is alive per se, in view of the fact that the soul, in which life is primarily situated, is a sort of part of a man, something of which nothing else is a cause. Man, for instance, has a plurality of causes, it is true, such as animal and bipedal, and yet a man is per se man. All things I would say maybe the best way to think of per se is saying it's respect. A per se thing is a separable per se. All things that pertain to something on its own and qua that thing in its own, hence the separable per se. Disposition, the arrangement of something with parts in terms either of its place or its potentiality or its form. Some sort of position has to be involved, as indeed the word disposition suggests. having/habit state, a sort of actualization of what has and what is had, just as with sort of actual action of process. When, for instance, A makes B and is made, there is between A and B a making, and in the same way, when there is something which has a piece of clothing and a piece of clothing that is had, there is between the haver and the had a having. So it's a sort of relationship. One obvious corollary is that is having cannot itself be had on pain of an infinite regress, if one can indeed have the having of the had. In another way, a disposition in respect of which what is disposed well or badly, and this either per se or with respect to something else. It is in this way that health is a habit, in that it is a disposition of this sort. Whatever is a part of such a disposition, so the excellence of a thing's parts is also a sort of habit of it. Affection, a quality in respect of which something admits of alteration, such as white and black, sweet and sour, heaviness and lightness. Actualizations of the above, i.e. when the alteration is actually occurring. And above all, harmful alterations and processes, conspicuously where harm is combined with pain. Significant magnitudes of disasters. Privation. Okay. When something does not have one of the things that it is natural for things to have, even if it would not be natural for the something in question to have it. For example, a plant is said to be deprived of eyes. Yeah. When something that would naturally have a feature, either in itself or in its genus, does not in fact have it. For instance, a blind man and a mole, which are both deprived of sight, are also in a different way. The man relative to the features of a man, and the mole relative to the features of the genus. When something that would naturally have a feature does not in fact have it at the very time when it would be natural for it to have it. Blindness, for instance, is a sort of privation, but the blind man is not someone who does not have sight at each and every age, but only someone who does not have sight at the age at which it would be natural for him to have sight. And in the same vein, something is said to be blind in any of the following circumstances. It is without sight in the medium in which it is natural for it to have sight. It is without sight in the bodily part in which it is natural for it to have sight. It is without sight relative to what would naturally be an object of its seeing. It is without sight in some way which it is natural for it to have sight. Forceful removement of something. In fact, there are as many counts of privation as there are negatives, using the in, un, a, non prefixes. Something is, for instance, said to be unequal if, although naturally constituted to have equality, it does not have it. And something is said to be invisible either by dint of it not having any color at all, or by its having color only poorly or non-footed, by dint of either not having feet at all or by having only weak feet. And something can be said to be non-F by dint of having F only to a small extent, non-chord, i.e. having it poorly, and also by dint of having F with difficulty or unsatisfactorily. For instance, what cannot be cut is so not by dint of not being able to be cut at all, but by dint of only being able to be cut with difficulty or unsatisfactorily, and also by dint of not having the feature in any way. In this way, we do not say that the one-eyed man is blind, but only who does not have sight in either eye. And it is because of this privation that it is not the case that everyone is either good or bad, either just or unjust, that there is rather an intermediate state. To have/possess a range of accounts. Oh my gosh. You guys can't hear this because I don't have the music for you guys. 1. To act in regard to something on the basis of one's own nature, or on the basis of one's own urge. Example, fever is said to possess a man, tyrants to possess their cities, and those who are dressed to have clothes on. If something is a recipient of X and X is in it, it has X. Examples, bronze has the form of the statue. The body has a disease. A container has what it contains. For if something is in a container, it is said to be had by it. For we say that the vessel has the liquid in it, that the city has men in it, that the ship has sailors in it, and it is also in this way that the whole has parts in it. Whatever restrains something from some process or action based on its own urge is said to have it. In that pillars are said to have the weights thrust on them, or that poets tell us that Atlas has the sky in his hands, on the assumption shared indeed by some natural philosophers, that it would otherwise collapse on the earth. And it is also in this way that the container is said to have in it what it contains, in that otherwise they would disperse, each under its own urge. And there are many and corresponding accounts of to be something as there are to have and possess something. Yeah, to be a worker at a particular place is to quote unquote have the job. To be/from something. We're up to 24 now. What is from as its matter, and this in two ways, with respect, that is, either to the primary genus or to the last form. Thus there is a way in which all smeltable things are from water, but there is also a way in which the statue is from bronze. As from the primary principle that has initiated the process, consider Q. What is the fight from? A. From a slanging match, since this is the original principle of the fight. As from the composite of matter and form, in the way that the parts are from the whole, the line is from the Iliad, and the stones are from the house. for it is the shape that is the end, and something is only completed and therefore whole if it has an end. As the form is from a part of it, in the way that man is from bipedal and syllable is from the letter, because this different from because this is different from the way that the statue is from bronze, the composite substance is from the perceptible matter, whereas the form is from the formal matter. Also, if one of these accounts applies in part, example, the child is from his mother, and his father and plants are from the earth, inasmuch as they are from a certain part of them. To follow something in time, night is from day, and stormy from good weather, in that the former follow the latter, and such accounts are in some cases, such as those we have just given, based on the possession of mutual interchange, and in others only on chronological sequence. One says, for instance, that the voyage was made from the equinox. It was made after the equinox, and that the Thargelia are from Dionysia, and the former followed the latter. Part. What a quantity can be divided into, no matter that way. I feel like what was the other one? Not part, but quality. Quality and part are basically the same thing. That's just the way I see it. What a quantity can be divided into, no matter what way. For anything subtracted from a quantity qua quantity is always said to be a part of it. For example, there is a way in which 2 can said to be a part of 3. Only those of the above that give a measurement. And so, as we have said, there is a way in which 2 is said to be a part of 3. There is also a way in which it is said, which it is not. I gotta say, this is something that, like, you have to really keep in mind. You can see that this one word has 5 different definitions, and some of the definitions are not mutually inclusive. Now, the reason I bring this up as a side note or tangent is when you're talking to people, especially if you're debating them, one of the really important things you have to do is to get them to define what they mean, and also demand that they're explicit in that meaning that they're using. Because, and this happens to me sometimes when I debate people, and it's very frustrating. But someone will take advantage of the fact that a word might have multiple definitions as a way to sort of play a Mott and Bailey game, where they will call something X, and then when you say, oh, well, it's not X, they will change the definition of X and say, no, I actually meant it in this way. And then you go, okay, well, the original definition, not the definition you made, but the original definition doesn't have all these other characteristics or traits that your new definition has. And then they'll, you know, run back forward down and go, well, that's because it's X. It has those things because it's X. It's like, yeah, but that only applies if you have the original definition. You change the definition. Yeah, and yeah, it's very frustrating. This is a very frustrating thing. If someone's doing this to you, like playing this sort of game, I would say they're either dishonest or um, they're stupid. And either way, it's very bad faith. Um, so if someone's acting this way, I would unironically just avoid debating them, because it's I guarantee you it won't be worth your time. Anyway, side tangent over, rant over. Let's continue with the definitions for part. What a form can be divided into irrespective of quantity are also said to be parts of it. This is why they say the species are parts of the genus. What the whole is divided into, or of what it is composed, either that is the form or what has the form. For example, in the case of a bronze sphere or a bronze cube, both the bronze, this is the matter in which the form resides, and the angle of inclination are part of the whole. This is sort of why I think quality, the quality and part are sort of basically interchangeable. This definition here. The contents of the account that displays the particular are also parts of the whole. It is in this way that the genus is also said to be part of the species, as well as there being the other way in which the species is said to be part of the genus. Whole. Something from which there is not absent any of the things which it is said to be a whole by nature. So basically whole and complete are the same. What contains its contents in such a way that they are a sort of unity, and this in two ways, either as being each individual particular, or as being the unity derived from them. For what is universal, and whose account is general, on the basis that it is a sort of whole, is universal in that it contains many things in its domain of particular predication, and that they are each individually a single thing. For example, man, horse, and God, since they are each individually living things, and the continuous and delimited is also a whole, just in case it is a sort of unity from several items, especially when they are only potentially present, but, if not, also when they are actually present. And of this group it is those that are wholes by nature, rather than those that are wholes by artifice, that are most fully wholes. This is like what we said in the case of unity, and indeed wholeness is a kind of unity. In the case of a quantity that has a beginning, middle, and end, there are those instances in which the order does not create the differentia, which are said to be sums, and those in which it does, which are said to be wholes. Those for which both are possible are both wholes and sums, and this sort are those whose nature, but not those whose shape, remains the same after the rearrangement, such as the wax or cloak. These are both said to be wholes and to be sums, since their order does not create differentia. Water, by contrast, and all liquids, and also numbers, are said to be sum. Nobody takes the whole number and whole water except metaphorically. And if something qua a unity is said to be a sum, then qua divided it is said to be an all. This number qua unity, and these units qua divided. Mutilated. A feature of quantities which must be divisible into parts as well as being wholes. Thus 2, for instance, is not mutilated when one of the two ones is subtracted. In no case a feature of quantities which must be divisible into parts as well as being wholes. In no case is the extent of the mutilation equal to what is left. and this goes for number in general. This is because another requirement is that the substance be left. If a cup is mutilated, it must be still a cup, but a number will not be the same after mutilation. Yeah, so it still has, when something has been divided but still keeps its, sorry, when something has been divided but still keeps its essence, I guess. It can also not be the case that by the way, just looking at the structure of the word mutilated here and its definition, I'm going to guess this was added. Like, it's different from all of them. Usually they list them off and then they have a paragraph at the bottom. This one's just the paragraph. Just pointing it out. It can also not be the case that all things with dissimilar parts can be mutilated, since in a way number has dissimilar parts as well, such as say 2 and 3. What can be said in general is that none of those things whose order does not produce a differentia, such as water and fire, can be mutilated. Things that can be mutilated must be those things that have an order by virtue of their substance. They must also be continuous. The scale in music, for instance, consists of dissimilar parts and has order, but is not something that can be mutilated. And even in the case of things that are wholes, not even these can be mutilated by privation of just any part. On the contrary, the parts removed in a mutilation have to be neither those fundamental to the substance, nor parts located in any arbitrary position. If, for instance, a hole is bored in a cup, the cup is not by this token mutilated, whereas it would be if the handle or some protuberance were removed. And a man is mutilated not if he has some flesh or his spleen removed, but only if he has some protuberance, only if some protuberance is removed, such as that when removed in its entirety and it cannot grow back. Bald men accordingly have not been mutilated. Protuberance. Something that protrudes from something else. Protruding. Hmm. So mutilation is when a part of a continuous thing is destroyed or removed in such a way that, I don't know, in such a way that it it makes the thing in question less complete. You know, so in the case of being a man, you're still a man if you are bald. No, that doesn't work. Because if you cut off your hand, you're still a man. But you are kind of mutilated. I don't know. I'm gonna dwell on that. Kind. Applied if there is continuous generation of things having the same form. Examples. The phrase "as long as humankind survives" amounts to the as long as there is a continuous generation of men. Said with reference to the primary source of the process leading to a thing's being. It is in this way we speak of the Hellene kind or the Ionian, the primary originator of the former being Helen and the latter being Ion. And it is those whose form are from an originator rather than those from some matter that are said to be a kind. Indeed, kinds are sometimes named from the female such as the descendants of Pyrrha, in a way in which plane is the genus of figures in the plane and solid is the genus of solids. For every figure is either a plane with ABC features or a solid with XYZ features. So it is plane and solid which underline these differentia. Kind and relation have similar sort of overlap, they're overlapping ideas. That's sort of the funny thing with words, and like, you know, words being a reference to reality rather than words making reality, which is what some people erroneously believe today. The weird thing is like, if a word is a reference to reality, sometimes it's not exact. And then, oh my gosh, this is upsetting me. And if, what was I even saying? I've lost my train of thought because of this silly ad. It made me annoyed. Yeah, words with their definition. The definition is never really exact. It's like a spotlight with, it's like a Venn diagram, you know. And then you're using words to spotlight and account for reality in a way that's never quite exact. The primary ingredient in accounts, which is in the account of what is it, since this is a genus of which we say the differentiae are the qualities. The range of accounts of kind are as follows: with reference to continuous generation of the same form, with reference to the primary source of process which is of the same form, as matter, for anything that has differentia and quality is a substrate, we are saying for the matter. Things are said to be other in kind if their primary substrate is other, and if they are not to be resolved one to the other, or both into the same thing. Thus, form and matter are other in kind, and also things whose account is based on another pattern of predication of being, given that some of the things that have being indicate what is it, some a sort of quality, others of the categories as previously distinguished. Yeah, but I haven't read the categories, lol. And these two are not to be resolved either into another or into some single thing. False. Accident. And that's it. Hmm. Wouldn't you just say falsehood is just a privation of what is true? Or something like that? Like falsehood, if truth, the two ways I've seen it defined, which makes sense to me, is that truth is a correlation in a sense. Like truth is when something is what it is, or is not when it is not, and then false is when it is it is said to be is when it is not, and is said to be is not when it is. And the other way is just that which the other definition of truth is that which is in accordance to reality. So it's just the opposite of truth. Anyway, false. Used of a false thing. On the one hand, either because it has not been assembled or because it would be impossible for it to be assembled. Examples: the claim the diagonal is commensurable, or the claim that you are seated. For of the I am seated. I am sitting right now. For of these one is always, the other sometimes false. And it is in this way that these things do not have being. Yeah, not being is a good way of saying false. But it's sort of like almost there. On the other hand, all things do have being, but are by nature such that they appear either to be of the sort which they are, or to be of things that do not have being. A sketch or dreams. These certainly are something, but not those things that they induce us to imagine. Things, then, are said to be in this way to be false, either by dint of their not themselves having being, or by dint of the fact that the appearance induced by them is of something that does not have being. A false account, qua false, is an account of things that do not have being. Accordingly, every account is false of something other than that of which it is a true account. The account, for instance, of a circle is false of a triangle. So this is, if you take it as like a correct correlation, meaning true, then this would be an example of a incorrect correlation. Because like this, a circle and a is false of a triangle in the sense that they are not the same, right? So to say that a circle is a triangle is false. And in a way, there is but one account of the particular, and that of the what it was to be that thing, whereas in another way there are many. This is because the particular itself and the particular as under some affection, for example Socrates and the musical Socrates, are in a way the same, and a false account is not an account of anything simpliciter. This, in fact, is why the view of Antisthenes is simplistic. He held that nothing is to be spoken of except under its proprietary account, that being one such for each object. The conclusion drawn was that it was impossible to have any contradiction, almost indeed that it was impossible to speak falsely. However, it is possible to speak of the particular not only under its own account, but also under that of something else. Now, of course, this can by all means be the case of falsehood, but there is also a way in which such a statement can be true. For instance, 8 can be said to be a double number under the account of 2. A double number. Wouldn't 4 be a double of 2? I don't know what he means by that. Also, a man, if he is adept at and prone to such accounts, not for some or other reason, but for the falsity itself. Also the man who is disposed to induce such accounts in others, which is like the way in which we say things are false if they induce a false appearance. Hence indeed the deceptiveness of the argument in the Hippias, to the effect that the same man is both false and true. This argument makes two assumptions. A, that the man who is able to speak false is false, and this, of course, is the man of knowledge and good sense. And B, that the man who willingly does wicked things is the better man. But this second assumption is falsely derived by induction, for instance, from the fact that the man who willingly limps, i.e., in the context who imitates a limp, is better off than the man who does so unwillingly. Given that if the man was willingly lame and not just pretending, he would presumably be worse off in this way, as also would the corresponding man in a moral case. I don't really get what this last bit about is, with like the faking everything, and I don't know what Hippias was up to. Pyrrhus was the last tyrant of Athens. Hmm. Battle of Marathon. Hmm. I did not know this guy existed. Anyway, 30. Last one. Accident. What pertains to something and what is true to assert, but neither necessarily or nor for the most part. Example, someone is digging a trench for a plant and finds treasure. This finding of the treasure is an accident for the man who digs the trench. It is not the case that finding the treasure necessarily comes from after digging the trench, nor one would for the most part in doing something find treasure. Another example, a musician happens to be white. This does not happen either of necessity or for the most part. So we say that it is an accident. So, given things have features, and some features belong to certain things in certain places and at certain times, saying that is a feature, but not of something because it is that thing, or because the time is now or the place is here, will be an accident. This also has the consequence that there is indeed no defined cause for the accidental, but only a chance, and therefore indefinite cause. It was an accident, for instance, for someone to go to a Aegina just in case he did not set out to get there but was driven there by some storm or kidnapped by some pirates. The accident has been produced or has being not qua itself but qua something else. The storm, that was the cause of his coming to a place for which he did not set out. I've also heard that, like, on this distinction, like, vision is the accident and of the eye, and it's kind of I don't know if the second definition will say this, but I'll just read it and then we can talk about it. Also, differently, everything that is a feature of a particular per se without being in its substance, as for instance, it is a feature of the triangle that its angles are equal to two right angles. This sort of accidental can be eternal, although none of the other sort is. We deal with this elsewhere. Okay. Book Epsilon. Oh, don't tell me that Epsilon. Okay, thank the Lord. I was really worried Epsilon was going to be another book of definitions, and I was going to be very sad. But I think I'm going to leave it here because we finally finished Book Delta. Um, I actually don't know how long this book is. Let's have a look now. We're at page 150. I'm guessing it's not actually 500 long, but it's close. It's 452 pages long. So 150 um, is not even close to finishing it. I'm like less than I'm about a quarter of the way through finishing this book, which is crazy. I'm going to finish this book next year by the rate that I'm going. Um, But yeah, I'm going steady. I think it's good because it is actually quite a dense book. Um, and by sort of taking it piece by piece, it's easier to digest what's being written. But yeah, I think I'm gonna leave it there for today. Book Epsilon, either sometime this week or next week. I'll see how big is Book Epsilon. I've been not doing many pages per stream recently just because I've been getting a bit lazy. Oh, it's only 14 pages. Yeah, Book Epsilon next week for sure. Or next time, next stream. Um, anyway, I am Sinner. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you